One illustration from the book, Dan. I'll sit myself down very still beside you. It'll be pure heaven. Are you in love with my red swimsuit more than you are with me, maybe? It's just some stretchy stuff. Come on. I'll open to one of the yellow slip-marked pages. Coeur d'Alene, Mission St. Ignatius River. Oh, I found it musing somehow. So all alone, somewhere back in those woods, the log cabins, the couple of tents, the tree works by the river, the mountain ridge in the background like a Norwegian fells. Of course, you have to make something of it, which I would recommend, just in general, when you're all by yourself later. Never want to be alone, she quacked, and rubbled her brown head against me. Better to give a listen to how one goes about it. It is, of course, Mission Coeur de Francis. You could, by the way, learn to ride here. A neighbor has a real old, good-natured pony. Perfect for starters. And just think of the ride there, through cactus deserts, Opuntia vaginata, across the bleak plain of polished pebbles. The well-known compiler of the Polish version, Waldemar. She just kept clapping hands, out of illustrated mirth. Dan, she cried, oh, that's so absolutely chic. They'll all just go crazy. Oh, I'm blessed for alternity. You'll never get rid of me. And gazed at me more nubilely. Ah, that'd work as a catchword. Vita Beata Franziska, the life of the Blessed Franziska, there in the green Bleaks of Ödingen. Blessed is also a Catholic rank, comes before sainted. She had long since adopted the requisite distant gaze. Even in her early years, well, circa from 4 years old on, she was a child of grace, she commenced, with a waxy stern voice. As she stood there in her humble little bed, she never grew weary of speaking the English greeting, how-dee-do. And upon hearing the name of the Lord, she would fall at once into raptures, so that, since in her paternal home there was well-nigh never a lack of such promptings, one state of ecstasy followed the other, almost uninterrupted. She at once lifted her visionary eye. She cried, Lord, press me yet the harder. Bear down upon me the full weight of thy cross. Was wild about double crosses. She was, at the time, scarcely capable of taking nourishment, toothlets, but she received the body of the Lord with ease, suspiring all alone with the Lord, right? Only in his presence could she find repose, and would often remain for up to 6 hours at a time in the embrace of the Lord, to whom she then likewise attempted to give herself wholly, the daily intercourse, yes, strove hourly to achieve full unification with him. Even back then she would, unbidden and spontaneously, present sundry images of the Passion, from Passionate, whereby from her young breast there would come sighs that one could not hear without being both horrified and touched. She giggled, setting her eyes a-beaming. Old Nicholas, she whispered, yes, the muse Niklaus, but then instantly, swing, grew sad again, grave and devout. She would have wished to spend both day and night there, but this was not subject to her wishes. Nonetheless, she had, during a retreat into a certain Montes Lute, Yellow Mountains, mystically betrothed herself to the Lord. She had approached him, had given him one kiss, not from mouth to mouth, but mind to mind, which resulted in her being graced to enter into an exchange of missives with the prophet Daniel, who was assigned to be her guide there, and who gave her instruction on how to conduct herself and the manner by which she might increase the more in virtue. He also placed upon her heart finger a precious ring, so that in her mind the matter could only be seen as settled, guaranteeing a higher intercourse. Upon returning home, she learned that she had sojourned with the Lord not, as it had seemed to her, one day, but rather 8 weeks, spending those days in sweet, blissful silence. Totally connized, in fact. She also always found a way to give laudatory thanks to that lord and his friends for having been removed to a beautiful island with him. Spencer Island. You've forgotten that, haven't you? About which she left behind the most detailed description. "Oh, Dan, assist me to remember," she cried woefully wisely. For during this time not a syllable had passed her young lips except on occasion for the words, "I wish the body of the Lord," while flatly refusing other nourishment. But that immediately slip-slided. All the same, during the aforementioned period she appeared to grow in spirit and gifts, so that many there were who took fright at her insights and maxims. And it was not long before it came to the point that she was suspected of having been with the devil, because she knew to expound upon certain details unfamiliar to the rabble. Far too quickly she was harassed and driven out from the world, so that none there were who wished to see her in their houses. Yes, her own parents took her for a hypocrite and fraud. Nor can it be denied that she, ever after, had to withstand the most frightening temptations. Ha! How they assail me, Lord! Stay by me when it overcomes me. Cunning. Her fantasies were filled with the most maddening thoughts of her life without him. The most scandalous images approached her. But not one had e'er touched the Virgin, protesting. Barren, forlorn, inconsolable, a darkening of the heart's eye, which was not a mere passing condition, but rather left her anxious for weeks on end, until she often did not know if she was in hell. Then she too began to speak, but so low that even by pricking the ears, one scarcely, but rather than articulated speech, would employ a single word of love. For instance, beloved, sweetheart, darling, bridegroom, and was simultaneously so moved that her entire body began to shudder for the length of a miserere, took in and held a breath, and then returned to immobility for perhaps 2 masses long. For 16 long years, 4 to 5 times a day, she was thrust, quivering and babbling, into the nude night of desolation, and writhed for at least 1 hour, often longer, in this deadly struggle. And did the terrors of her condition lessen? Far from it. But rather they appeared to intensify. For when, on the next day, these same horrors, neath the pallid mask of eternity, would commence, her constrained memory failed to do its service in reminding her that she had escaped them divers times before. Only sporadically did one ray of light, as if falling through a narrow crack, break into her state to prompt a belief this would not last forever. When alone, she thought of naught other than how she might put an end to her life. When passing some body of water, she desired to throw herself into it, but e'en then anxiety befell her due to the remoteness of her lover, the cruelty of her having been banished from his presence. She sought him and wanted to love him, but was unable to do so. Her mind wandered, groping blindly about. The underpinnings of her heart were sere, her energies extinguished, her mind blunted. When the Lord entered into her, she constantly had the feeling as if someone were moving back and forth inside her. Sick, Goerres 2, 461, confer Freud 2.3, Interpretation of Dreams, page 623. She rapped about, sighed, wept, lamented, all in vain, until at last, midst the words, "Not my will, but thine be done," she capitulated. Nevertheless, she trained all her wretchedness in trading and trafficking to such an extent that a comparison with the elevated grace, which, when she recalled it in conjunction with her own unworthiness as its recipient, always distressed her sorely from anew, plus carne, flesh, and canaille, or from Egyptian Karnak, the temple, and Martian, Leo, one who is more than a gut head, This the higher meaning, for whom her nasty gift for tears was no less opprobrious than the hourly sounding of lovely harmonies in her environs. Voila. She would then, midst her suffering, oft cry out so stridently that she could be heard several flats away, and neighbors came to complain. What wonder, then, that her destitution soon reached a new and all the more horrible zenith when her unnatural parents came to the rascally inhuman decision to barter her young body away for a trifle to a sensualist, to the bestial, crudest leather merchant of the entire suburb. Her charm and innocence indigence moved an erstwhile noble benefactor to take her entirely neath his wing, Genevieve de Brabant, Offenbach. And as for the sprawling wilderness of the far west, suggest that, far from avoiding such, to search it out instead. The life of the Blessed Franziska, there in the green Bleaks of Ödingen. Very nice. Her fingers, however, were splayed at such sophisticated angles that it approached a miracle. Yes, you see, when two have entered into raptures of such sort, they appear to embolden one another. Goodness, how true. As on frequent occasion she begged the Lord, midst tears, "Take me into your paradise," she would always receive the answer, "'Tis not yet time." Once, however, after she had suffered many years of untold toothaches and pains, she suddenly beheld herself removed to a great green garden. There she also perceived a heavy bluish luster, where at once, in a kind of harmony, branches began to sway. A universal soughing arose in the foliage. Even smaller plants had nodded their little heads to her, while flowers, umbels, and stems intoned a sweetly lisping hymn, just as other most wonderful sounds and strange voices could be heard in her vicinity back then, to wit, Radio Luxembourg. The usual intermediary phenomena refused to be excluded. Several times her shoes were filled to overrunning with sweetstuffs, so that in the end one could no longer dismiss the conclusion that the process involved here was the formation of sugar. There was the almost incessant sound of rappings. One often beheld her hovering a good 1½ ells in the air, and all the while smiling an uncommonly comely smile. Frenzel's assumption into heaven. Her entire body was redolent with the sweetest of fragrances. 13 marks 80 a bottle. Production of perfumes and musical moistical sounds. Encyclopedia Britannica. So that if one wished to seek her out, one simply followed those bouquets, which then would likewise hang for some time in the air of rooms she frequented. Showers of fragrance, as of oranges, cinnamon and sugar, violets and plums, and other such unplucked cherries. The moment she was visited by the Lord, not to mention when he then touched her, certain aromas were instantly perceptible, in an effervescent glow and flow, so that the odor filled the entire cottage. In the odor of unholiness, as evil tongues, horrible dicta, incense. Most particularly fragrant was her hand, by which she was led to still higher joys of most extraordinary sweetness. You blush? She partook of certain foods only while dancing, and midst peculiar movements of her little tongue. Ice cream, you'll be doled a portion shortly, remind me. She then danced, and leapt her holy tarantella so agilely, as if she were a ghost made palpable. Just as the gift for jubilation was granted her to an incredible degree, her powers of digestion also exceeded those of the ostrich by several multiples. Healing miracles were certainly not lacking. One who had been unable to stand erect for years began to rise up in her presence. Men who had been mute for some time began, no sooner than they beheld her, to invent the most entertaining yarnlets, though, to be sure, some might well notice that said gentlemen, with their superfluous lickings of the chops, were constantly enthusing about the blossoms of Saint Francisca. Likewise, expressions such as taking the veil occurred with a greater frequency than one would have termed normal. Once there appeared to said previously mentioned by name prophet a virgin with one box from which she sprinkled him with a liquid, Gurus 294. Oh say, beware, heavy pressure in all limbs and members. So great was the jubilation of her soul that, when shortly thereafter Christa and several from her sorority came to visit, the joy within her heart caused her to erupt into laughter, and it seemed to her that her heart was nigh to burst sting. She therefore bade the lamp of her dormitorium be extinguished, so that no one might notice her merriment, and 'twas done according to her wishes. The lamp fell down, and the room turned dark. But as she was still frightened, she asked that she be hearkened to, sick. She kindly bade yet again that the sisters remove themselves, and in this too she was obeyed. Left peacefully to herself, she now could rejoice without disrupture in the grace granted her. And broke the while, out of purest glee, whether she wished to do so or not, but she did in fact so wish, into such an immoderate laughter that she would often plead with God that he prevent its sonority, that no one might perceive it. It also seemed to her on such nights as if she were flying about in mid-air, and the rapture in which she thus took her pleasure did not fade all that quickly. An open and shut case. She had meanwhile made great progress in her inner life, and was, however greatly she, in her forlorn state, might fret and pine, determined to persevere wholeheartedly as an apprentice. So high was the level of perfection perfidy to which she ascended, that she summarized her thoughts in a small book entitled Canon of the Bride, Thoughts and Sighs Concerning the Attainment of the True Best Goal, the Delight of the Lord, by Francisca Carnalio, printed in solitude, crown octavo, dirty and sex pages, accompanied by a narration anent the directest path to blessedness and a sojourn in said paradise for Christian sisters of a similar mind, including not unnumerous paginastetchings, and also an appendix dealing with the private life of the prophet Daniel. This provided under the motto, Musci Tickloof Arsum. You see, that is Satan once again who harasses you and wonderfully laughs and guffaws through you. Say, reconsider that 3 times over. The wild man from the librarium can be not just embarrassingly unpleasant, but also dangerous in fact. I would suggest that, far from avoiding such, to search it out instead, until there should be found amidst those regions a sanctuary of sanctuaries, which then, after much responsible searching, was located. Cour de Francis. Say, Dan, where's this picture to be found, in fact? In the north and west, not far from the Columbia River. She had pressed her small face to the magnifying glass, and was studying it eagerly.